Welcome to the Talking Sports Law podcast, created and produced by K&L Gates. Each episode features a discussion of legal issues from the world of sports, interviews with sports law professionals, and analysis of recent trends. Let's get this episode kicked off.
Welcome to another episode of Talking Sports Law from K&L Gates. My name is John Wilson. I'm joined, as always, by my trusty sidekick and co-host, Trevor Gates. Trevor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Hey, John, what are we? So we're about halfway through summer, which is probably my favorite time of the year. It's hard to beat summer in the Pacific Northwest. So I guess it's a little bittersweet that's coming to an end, but it's drawing us closer to probably my other favorite time of the year, which is the start of the NFL season coming up shortly. And I think that is very timely for our guest on today's episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are just on the eve of training camps opening, and we are very excited on today's episode to be joined by Nick Brown, Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer for Arthur M. Blank Sports and Entertainment, the ownership group behind the NFL's Atlanta Falcons, MLS's Atlanta United, and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. In that role, Nick oversees legal, security, human resources, government relations, NFL compliance for the Falcons, just a huge portfolio, and we're excited to hear from Nick. So on today's episode, we'll sort of dig into Nick's path to AMB, from private practice at King & Spalding to a stint as legal counsel at the MLS club New York Red Bulls, and eventually coming back to Atlanta. So we'll talk about, what his role for AMB entails, some advice for law students and, young lawyers who are hoping to break into the sports industry, and maybe some of the trends that he sees that are shaping the industry today. Nick received his undergraduate degree from Liberty University, go Flames, and his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law. Go Hoos! So Nick Brown, welcome to Talking Sports Law, and thanks so much for joining us.
So John, Trevor, thanks for having me, guys. Man, you made me sound a lot more interesting with that intro than I think I actually am, but appreciate you guys having me on, man. Rookies reporting tomorrow for training camp, and no place I'd rather be on the eve of training camp than with you guys. So great to be here.
Let's kick it off. Let's talk about your very interesting background, Nick. So can you take us through your career path from law school to private practice to how you broke into the working in the sports industry, and what sort of drew you into sports law and how you hit each step along the way to get where you're at now?
Yeah, sure. So, I think at some point we've all heard the expression that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Little aside, I don't really know if that's true, because at the end of the day, work is work. I really just totally loved what I was doing. I'd probably just be out skiing, fishing, or hunting, or, doing something non-work related. But obviously, as a kid, I think like anybody who listens to this podcast, I loved sports. And so just wanted to figure out a way to blend what I love as a passion in sports with a professional career. I wasn't good enough to play sports. I kind of figured being somewhat around sports and maybe representing the actual athletes who play them was a good path. I thought maybe I would go into an athlete representation type of role. In college, I met a pretty prominent baseball agent, spent some time with him, and for lack of better terms, he kind of crushed my dreams and told me, "Hey man, don't try to be an agent. Just focus on going to a great law school, going to a great law firm, try to build a great legal career, and then everything else will take care of itself." So from there, I was engaged at the time. So my wife and I or fiance at the time, spent a very considerable amount of time figuring out where we were going to spend the next 3 years. Ended up at the University of Virginia. John, like you said, go Hoos. Love that school, love everything about it. From UVA, went to King & Spalding. That law firm, the people there, my experience there was second to none. While I was at K&S, really had the great fortune of being there, right place, right time kind of thing. We were representing Arthur Blank, who's our owner and chairman, during the construction of Mercedes-Benz Stadium down here in Atlanta. The Falcons had been a longtime client of King & Spalding, and when I found that out after I got to King & Spalding, I didn't know that at the time, but once I got my foot in the door at K&S, I went to the partner who represented the Falcons and just begged to do something Falcons related. And I think, as anybody would probably expect, working for the Falcons was like everybody at the firm wanted to do something for the Falcons. So it took months and months of me chipping away and begging to finally get invited to sit in on a conference call that I wasn't allowed to bill for and not announce myself and be a fly on the wall. And eventually that led to me sending out calendar invites that I wasn't allowed to bill my time for and getting things off the printer that I wasn't allowed to bill my time for. And, eventually that foot in the door led to a broader representation of Falcons throughout the whole construction of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, whether it be the financing, the naming rights deal, the founding sponsor relationships, the ticketing platforms, anything that's kind of Falcons related, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I was fortunate to play a pretty significant part in that. From that, the Falcons organization heard of an opening with the New York Red Bulls, put me in contact with some folks at the Red Bulls and interviewed there. Really fantastic organization up there in Harrison, New Jersey. Loved my time there. Could not think more highly of Mark de Grand Prix, the general manager there, Naba Parker, the former general counsel, who was my boss. Had a wonderful experience with everything up there. Eventually, A&B Group, A&B Sports Entertainment, called me back and said, "Hey, we've got an opening here on our legal team. Do you want to come back and just work directly for us?" So I came back here in 2018 and have been here since then. So I'm coming up on my 9th season now with the Falcons and just love everything about this organization, our chairman, the way that we give back to our community, all the major events, special events we get to hold here in Atlanta. And yeah, just really everything about my job and what we get to do and the impact we get to have.
That's awesome. So Nick, when I saw you a couple of months ago in Chicago for the Sports Lawyers Association conference, shout out SLA, big fans of SLA here on the podcast. You talked a little bit about how you had, recently transitioned into a new role as the Chief Administrative Officer for the Falcons. So, I wanted to just hear a little bit about how that transpired and how, your job shifted a little bit from, just being sort of purely legal to a broader sort of portfolio that you're now responsible. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about that and sort of what a typical day might look like.
Sure. So in my current role, it's primarily Falcons based on a day-to-day basis. So I've got legal, human resources, security, football compliance, which essentially is NFL compliance. So NFL rules, some football administration, government relations as well. And then I still have a legal function within the A&B Sports and Entertainment portfolio that includes Atlanta United, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So some of the very big picture events that we host at the stadium, I still serve a legal function with that as well. But day to day, it's the Falcons portfolio that takes up most of my time. Could be, I'm working on a personnel matter that's HR focused. It could be you have a security incident that's involving one of our players. I mean, we had everybody knows this, but we had a very large transition in our coaching staff and our front office this off season. So we brought Matt Ryan back as our president of football and Kevin Stefanski as our head coach, Ian Cunningham as our general manager, and changed over the entire coaching and personnel staff this off season. So, going through the process of negotiating those deals and just it could change by the day. And, there's not really a typical day. I know that's kind of cliche to say in the industry, but that is very, very true. It's part of what makes the job so interesting. I still very much wear a legal hat, but I like to say that I'm 50% legal, 50% business, and 50% football. I know that doesn't add up to 100, but oftentimes I don't feel like I'm able to give 100. So take that for what it's worth, but there's plenty of work to go around.
I'm sure there's no shortage of work to go around for you. That's for sure. So Nick, you talk a little bit about this already, sort of your transition from outside counsel at KNS to supporting internal clients, right? Moving in-house. Can you talk a little more about what that transition was like and how maybe it changed the way you approached risk generally or legal risk versus sort of business practicality and moving the business forward, even if you are facing certain risks?
Yeah, Trevor, when I was at KNS, I was on the M&A team there, and what I really valued about that experience, being a corporate lawyer on an M&A transaction, you really got to sit in the room. Say it's a large M&A transaction. You're sitting in the room with probably 6, 8 other very sharp legal minds, and I may get to dabble in real estate, but we've got a real estate expert who's speaking to the real meat of the real estate issue in an M&A transaction. I may dabble in IP, but we've got an IP expert. They dabble in employee benefits, but we've got an employee benefits expert. The actual transaction documents I could be responsible for, but we had a bunch of specialists who were contributing to the larger transaction. In the in-house role, I may be sitting in a conference room with 6 or 8 business people, but I'm the one specialist who is supposed to know the real estate, the IP, the employee benefits. I'm supposed to know all of those things wrapped up into one. I'm by no means an expert in any area, let alone all of those areas. I think the experience as an M&A lawyer at a large law firm helped shape my ability to navigate those in-house conversations. I mean, just candidly, to the point to survive the meetings with the business folks so I can get back to my computer and look up the answers they need to know. But it really does, put on a different hat when you're in the business meetings, because they don't care about the specific statute or the reference, the footnote type of things that you would put into a brief. They just care about what is the sliding scale of risk and how much trouble are we really going to get into if we, push the envelope. So just being able to talk in terms of business terms, like a lay person and less like a lawyer, I think it's just been really helpful.
So we always like to ask our guests on sort of a go forward basis, whether there are typical big issues or trends you see on the horizon in sports law or sort of maybe the broader sports business right now. So are there any that you're seeing that are particularly noteworthy, that are sort of front and center of mind for you right now?
Yeah, well, in one that I think everybody's talking about, certainly in the NFL's private equity, I don't see that trend changing. One of the things that's, I think, really interesting about private equity investment in sports, particularly in the NFL, we're seeing it really in a way that's not very active private equity investment. It's much more of a passive. And by that, I mean, private equity investors aren't coming in and demanding controlling the owner status. Like they're going to be the voice in the room, the Jerry Jones type, where they're making personnel decisions. They're doing it much more from a financial investment perspective, that they see the value in where the league is going. And to me, that really speaks volumes about our league and where the future of our league is going. I mean, the private equity market exists to make money, and these guys make a lot of money by being smart investors. It shows that they believe in the product that we're putting out there, and the direction and the future of not only the NFL and our league, but really sports in general. You're seeing, in addition to the big private equity shops, some of the smaller ones that are being formed and jumping in. You're seeing it in baseball quite a bit as well. So certainly private equities going a lot of places. I think sports betting data rights is another one that a lot of people are talking about right now. That's not going anywhere other than up, more involved. How data is getting shared, how leagues and teams are commercializing on the one hand, but also protecting integrity of the game. That's being scrutinized left and right. We're seeing some issues, right now in the NFL, candidly, about some players in the college ranks and how does that blend over into their future status in the league after college. A whole host of issues, man. We can get into name, image, and likeness rights, but I know that I'd like to keep this podcast at least somewhat on schedule. So I'm going
No,
to keep
those
it
are all
somewhat short, but man, we could go on for hours.
yeah, no, and those are all consistent with what we're hearing, across all of our clients, right? All of those issues are things that people are thinking about. Nick, I know that UVA was a really important place for you and formative. And you talked a little bit about getting your dreams crushed by a baseball agent when you were younger. But we do have a number of folks who listen to the podcast who are either law students or more junior lawyers who are kind of trying to get into the sports industry and find their way. And so I just wondered, what is some advice that you were given as, either a law student or a young lawyer that really stuck with you and actually worked?
Yeah, John, I think a couple of things, and it's kind of cliche, but I think it's cliche for a reason, and there's a lot of truth to it. And that is the importance of focusing on becoming a really great lawyer first, and then letting everything else take care of itself. Um, that can't be understated. And the industry in which we work is extremely competitive. Everybody wants to work in sports in some capacity. Just candidly, there's only so many jobs, and kind of what's the first cut when it comes to competing for jobs is, are you a good lawyer? And that's a pretty easy one to distinguish. If you're not a good lawyer, well, okay, thanks for trying. So really, just focus on becoming a great lawyer first, and then things will take care of themselves. And then once you kind of meet that threshold, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and ask for some type of support, help, or mentorship. I think back to when I was going through law school for one or for two, trying to break into the sports world. I went to my first SLA conference maybe in 2016, something like that. I mean, SLA was kind of big, but it's certainly not as big as it is now. There's just so many tools, resources. I mean, this podcast, man, when I was in law school, I don't even know if like the internet existed, but things like this where you can get out there, make connections, build bridges. There's just so many opportunities. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there, build a network, because it's really all about somebody opening that door for you and creating an opportunity. But once that opportunity is created, you have to be able to step into it and perform at a high level. And so that ties back to being able to be a very good lawyer.
All right. Well, you just heard the whistle blow, which means that we've come to the end of our regular time and we're going into overtime. So, Nick, in overtime, Trevor and I will ask you just a few kind of rapid fire questions that are not specifically related to the sports industry. They might be a little bit. So, Nick, are you ready for overtime?
Bring it on.
Nick, you played baseball growing up and were inducted into the Youth Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown after a particularly memorable home run. Can you tell our listeners that quick story?
Yeah, sure. So the headline sounds a lot cooler than the actual story, but I played on a pretty good baseball team when I was 12 years old. We got invited to play in a tournament in Cooperstown, New York. Anybody who participated in the tournament technically got inducted into the American Youth Baseball Hall of Fame. If you happen to hit a home run in the tournament, they put your home run ball in, I guess, theoretically a special spot in the Hall of Fame. You got to sign it. And in theory, they put it somewhere. I haven't been back in, I don't know, 25 years. So it's probably not there anymore. But I did happen to hit a home run while I was there. I guess at 12, I peaked. That's what everybody likes to hear. That's why I went into the long.
So Trevor, note to self, next time either you or I are in Cooperstown, we need to go and say, could we see the Nick Brown home run ball, please? Please bring that out from the collection. Yeah. All right, Nick. So your dad coached a bunch of your youth sports teams, from what I understand. Looking back, how do you feel like that shaped the way that you kind of lead and manage today in your role?
Man, that is a good and deep question. I look up to my dad, admire my dad so much. I mean, just even by osmosis, learning from my dad, the idea of humble leadership, putting others before yourself. I think you can learn so much of that through team sport generally, but seeing it modeled by my dad, being a father myself now and recognizing the sacrifice that he represented to me. But just playing sports growing up, the idea of teamwork, selflessness, leaning on others, encouraging others. I'm just such a believer in being a part of a team and learning those things as a child. I think it's just huge.
What is one of the greatest live sports moments you've ever been a part of?
So I grew up just outside of Columbus, Ohio. Grove City, Ohio is my hometown. A couple years ago, we hosted the national championship game here at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Got to see my Ohio State Buckeyes win the national championship game here at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So may have a little bit of bias in this, but definitely seeing Ohio State bring home the national championship in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium at an event where I got to do the contract to bring them here was pretty special.
Nick, what would be your go-to guilty pleasure snack food?
So my grandmother makes, I'm not really sure if this is a snack food, but I've got to shout out my grandma at some point on here. She makes wonderful biscuits and gravy. She's from Kentucky, and homemade biscuits and gravy. Every time I go back to Ohio and see her, she makes biscuits and gravy for me. So my favorite food of all time, her homemade biscuits and gravy, hands down.
Listen, I will fly to Ohio. I love a good biscuits and gravy. So you might have to figure out a way to make that work. But your final question, Nick, if you had not ended up in sports law, what would you be doing instead?
I think I would still be at King and Spalding, guys. I really, loved what I was doing there. I think, but for the right opportunity at the right time to get into career in sports, I really don't know that I would have left practicing at King and Spalding or at a really big law firm. Whether it's K&L Gates, King and Spalding, the opportunity to work at a really big law firm with smart people, learn from some of the best, was really a great opportunity. It's something that just even being in my current role, I miss. Sometimes I miss a lot of my colleagues and peers from the law firm days. So I think I would have stayed at King and Spalding if I wasn't here.
Well, that'll bring us to the end of our overtime segment, and that'll be a wrap on another episode of Talking Sports Law from K&L Gates. Big thanks to our guest, Nick Brown, for a fantastic conversation about his path through the sports industry. You can find all of our episodes on our website, klgates.com, or by just searching for Hub Talks, wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to be a guest on our podcast, or if you have ideas for future podcast topics, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Trevor or myself. Thanks very much for listening to Talking Sports Law from K&L Gates.